Welcome to the Rustic Garden Homestead. This video is all about making your own seed starting mix. I'm going to go over a couple recipes, go over the ingredients. It costs a little bit more money to buy the ingredients in bulk, but when you make the seed starting mix that way, you're going to save a whole lot of money. So the first way technically that you can make seed starting mix is to buy it in a bag, and it's definitely worth the convenience to buy it in a bag if you're just doing a couple of flats of seeds indoors. You just don't need a lot. But if you're doing something like I do on a larger scale, and I will fill this 3 times and move stuff out, I would rather make the seed starting mix myself and save some money. The ingredients are basically the same. So you can buy, and just for this example, 1 quart is equal to about 1 liter. So when I talk about quarts, just consider it a liter. Seed starting mix, Jiffy. This is basically peat moss, Coco Coir, and some Vermiculite. They also put in some Perlite. I'm going to show you those basic ingredients. This 12 quart bag will cost you anywhere from $6 to $8 or $9, depending on where you buy it. You can also buy, any kind of seed starting mix, really. This is by ProMix. This is, I think, 16 quarts. This is going to cost you anywhere from $10 to $16. Same basic ingredients. There is peat moss in there, some Vermiculite, some Perlite, maybe some Coco Coir. When you read the ingredients, you're going to see it's all pretty much the same. Don't get fooled by, the bags having all these additions to them. It's not really important. I want to say this up front and be clear that you want a sterile starting mix. You don't want any soil life in your seed starting mix. Outside, that's when you want all the good stuff. And these plants will have plenty of time to interact with microbes and do their thing out in the garden. The reason you want a sterile mix is you don't want any kind of fungus, molds, fungus gnats, insects taking over your seed starting mix. So you want it to be sterile. Peat moss is the basic ingredient in your Jiffy starting mix, your ProMix bags, any starting mix you buy really. And fungus gnat eggs can sit in peat moss. That's just pure peat moss right there. That's what I make my starting mix from. Fungus gnat eggs will sit in the peat moss and they can stay in there for years. Not sure how long, at least a good solid year. So when you're buying this for the first year, and if it's not sitting in your house 2 or 3 years, there's a good chance you could have fungus gnat eggs in anything that has peat moss. So you want to hit that with boiling water. You want to hydrate your seed starting mixes, your peat moss, your Coco Coir bricks with boiling water. That will kill out any of the soil life, and that greatly reduces the chance of you getting fungus gnats. You don't want them infesting your seed starting area. So let's get started with the basic ingredients. So here is a brick of Coco Coir. This is compressed coconut husk basically. It says eco-friendly. It's up to you to decide if you want to use peat moss or if you want to use Coco Coir. But Coco Coir is not as eco-friendly as we think. Forests are, taken down for coconut trees. Lots of water and energy goes into washing it. Peat moss, people feel it's not sustainable. You're taking it from a bog. So you have to decide which one you want to use. Don't get fooled that one's better than the other. I like using peat moss. It seems to work better. I found with experimenting, a combination of Coco Coir and peat and Vermiculite works pretty well. But I'm going to go over a couple recipes and you can kind of make this as you wish. The whole idea is to make it cheaper than it is to buy as a seed starting mix in a bag. And I like to copy the basic ingredients in the Jiffy mix. So peat moss, this is a 2 cubic or might be a 3 cubic foot compressed bale. It's going to cost you about $24. So it's going to be money up front. But I just hydrate this with boiling water, and that's what I start my seed starting mix with. Over here we have very fine Vermiculite. This is what you want to mix into your mix. That works really well as a blend with the peat moss. Up here we have Perlite. You don't really need this. You see this a lot in potting mixes. We're going to add some in to make it look fancy. And this is really coarse Vermiculite. When you're buying the Vermiculite, you want to make sure you get the very fine Vermiculite. That's what you want. You can use this in place of the Perlite. I bought it by mistake. This is just to add, potentially more drainage to your mix, but it's not 100% necessary. I'm also not going to be adding in any organic dry granular fertilizers. You just don't need that. A lot of times those dry organic granulars will just get fungus on them, get molds on them, because there's no soil life to digest them and break them down. And they have to be broken down for your plants to use them. So I only use a water-soluble fertilizer nowadays. You can use whatever one you want. Please subscribe and follow me. I'll be going over how to feed and fertilize seed starts in a different video. So to get started, let's go with the Coco Coir bricks. You want to add boiling water to this. Coco Coir generally is much less riskier to having the fungus gnats in there. So you could use cold water if you want, but cold water takes a long time to hydrate this. So I like to get a container like this and then just pour the boiling water on there. Let me get the boiling water. We'll mix up our batch of peat and coir, and then we'll get to the recipes. First, we'll hydrate the brick of compressed Coco Coir. Again, this is going to make 8 quarts, and it's going to cost you somewhere between $4 and $6. Boiling water right on top. And I just know from experience you're going to need about that much water in there, and just let it absorb over maybe a 15-minute period. I did raise this side here so that the water pools down, you know where the Coco Coir brick is, and it's starting to break up. If you have too much water, I mean, that's okay. I would go a little bit more slowly than you think. You don't want it to be oversaturated. Once it cools down, we can work with it. But that's what it's going to look like. And it takes, I don't know, 10-15 minutes maybe. I can already see the water is getting absorbed pretty quickly. Going to add a little bit more. And just go slow and steady until it's done. I don't use Coco Coir that much anymore. So this only takes about 5 minutes for it to hydrate. It's going to take another 5-10 minutes for it to cool down. So I just kind of mix everything through and make sure it's all saturated. That's pretty good. It's not really oversaturated. I do recommend maybe doing this the day before you're going to start your seed starting mix. It's pretty common to put in too much water. After a day of it sitting, it'll dry out a bit. You just don't want to use, you know, sopping wet seed starting mix when you start your seeds. The Coco Coir is totally hydrated. I put in a little too much water. You don't want that much coming out of it when you squeeze it. But this dries pretty quick. When we add in the peat moss and other stuff, it's going to be fine to use. But this is what it's going to look like. By making the starting mixes ourselves, we're going to save about 75% on the cost of the products, depending on what you're buying. This is peat moss. We're going to hydrate this with hot water. You can see how dry it is. You probably want to do this outside because the dust will fill the air. You don't want to be breathing this in. So I just use, you know, a tiny little trash can that I got at Home Depot and do this, you know, no special measuring. I do it all by eyeball, and a good amount of boiling water in there. Just let it soak in. Too hot to handle, of course, so I just stir it in slowly. Stir slowly. That will keep the dust from going everywhere. And again, probably wear a face mask or do this outside. You don't want to be breathing that in. And that was a lot of water. Still more to go. Peat moss, Coco Coir is going to expand. And just from experience, I just know my measures pretty well using this can and boiling water and how much peat moss to put in there. So I'm going to just mix this through, and we'll have the second ingredient ready to go. And just work the peat moss around. If it's too wet, just add in a little bit more, and you end up with something that looks like this. And when you squeeze it, this is what you want. Not much water coming out of there. This is predominantly what I use. I use 6 parts peat moss, 1 part, 1.5 parts fine vermiculite, and that's what I use for my seed starting mix. A part is just an equal measure. I use this, so I would fill it up with peat moss. That's considered 1 part. I would put 6 of these into this can. We're going to do that in a second once this all cools down. And then I would fill this with the vermiculite, the fine vermiculite. That's 1 part. So it'll be 6 parts peat moss, 1 part vermiculite, That's the main recipe I use, and that technically I guess would be recipe number 2. The first recipe is just buying the bag stuff. So let me let this cool down and we'll get to making the different mixes. So again, you're using equal parts. 6 parts peat moss. I already put 5 parts in here, 5 of these. This is number 6. Just use the same size container for all your ingredients and you're making equal parts. You don't pack this in there. You just lightly put it in. My 1 part fine vermiculite, and then we go ahead and mix it through. Mix everything up well. And again, it's 6 parts peat moss, 1 part fine vermiculite. I will put the recipes in my blog if you want to visit the rustedgardenblog.com, and there will be an article out in a day or so with all the recipes. Once it's mixed through, it's going to look something like this, and that is a great looking starting mix. It's just peat and vermiculite. If we open the bag of Jiffy Mix, this is what Jiffy Mix looks like. It's not hydrated. I would hydrate this with hot water too. But when you're looking at both ingredients, or both starting mixes, they're pretty similar. This is lighter because there's no water in it. Make sure you hydrate your seed starting bagged mixes. It's a lot to say, with boiling water too. But this is a great starting mix. I like to, simplify things too. So it's just 2 ingredients, peat and vermiculite. This is what the Pro Mix looks like. There's some perlite added into there. You can see the strands of Coco Coir. I'm just going to drop that in there. Let's do that now for the next recipe. So we have the 6 parts peat, 1 part vermiculite, and if you wanted to add in, we'll do this right here real quick. If you wanted to add in the Coco Coir, we're going to do 2 parts, actually I'm sorry, 3 parts Coco Coir, 6 parts of the peat moss, and then 1 part vermiculite. And if you wanted to add another half part, you could do that. But let's just get this mixed up first. So 1 part Coco Coir, 2 parts Coco Coir, and you could do 2 or 3 parts. You really have options on the consistency you want on your seed starting mix. So again, 3 parts Coco Coir, 6 parts peat moss, 1 part of the vermiculite, and then we're going to mix it through. I use my hand now as everything's cooled off. So once mixed through, it's going to look something like this. And again, if you want to check out my blog in a day or 2, I'll have all the recipes on there. This is perfect. So 6 parts peat, 2 or 3 parts of the Coco Coir, 1 part, 1.5 parts of the vermiculite, and you make a really nice seed starting mix. We could add in at this part, or at this point, let me reach over here real quick. If you wanted it to look a little bit fancier, I guess this would technically be another recipe. You don't have to do this, but in something this size, that's probably going to be a half part perlite. I don't really think you need this for drainage, but some people swear by it. This is going to now look like your fancy potting mixes. That's all they do, is they add in perlite and then charge us a little bit more. So mix that through, and you have a seed starting mix with a little more drainage capacity, and you could add in more of the perlite if you want to, but it gives you a good idea of the different ways. Let's add in a little bit more. I'll just do the top. So if you add in more, it's going to look something like this. And you generally get the idea. The reason you want to do it with equal part ratios is just so that if you're going to do it again, you're going to make it year after year, you can write a recipe down and you can stay pretty close to it. That's good looking stuff. All right, and then the final one that we're going to do is just going to be Coco Coir as the main ingredient, no peat moss. Some people don't like to use peat moss, or they can't get it, or it's too expensive. I find the Coco Coir is much harder to get. So for the Coco Coir recipe, the general recipe that I use now is 6 parts Coco Coir, 2.25 parts of the vermiculite. Now I don't have 6 measures, I don't have 6 parts, so this is just 2 parts. So I would divide by 3. 3 into 6 is 2 parts of the Coco Coir, and then 3 into 2.25 for the vermiculite is 0.75. 0.75 is going to be about here. So 0.5 would be half, 0.25 would be a quarter. We're going to go with 0.75. And it, you don't have to be that exact, but it's going to be something like that. I like using more vermiculite with the Coco Coir because I found that the root systems seem to like it better. The vermiculite holds on to the water better. It looks almost sandy, but I've done experiments way back in the past of just growing in straight Coco Coir. That didn't really go well. Straight peat didn't work well. Straight Coco Coir didn't work well. It was the addition of vermiculite that helped out the Coco Coir, or the addition of peat. Looks pretty, sandy looking. That's just the vermiculite. But this is a fine starting mix. Sterile. Your seeds will grow in it. It's spongy. It holds water. Nice and loose. You don't need to add any perlite to it. You could always do that if you want to. If you want to throw in a handful, it'll look fancier now. It's going to end up looking like that. So those are the main recipes that I use. Another recipe, and when you're done, whatever starting mix you choose, if it's the Jiffy mix, if it's the Pro Mix pre-bagged, if it's the peat based one, peat and Coco Coir, just Coco Coir and vermiculite, whatever one you pick. I don't recommend putting in organic granular fertilizers, but if you wanted to put in worm castings, you could go ahead and do that. And let's pretend, all I would do is take a handful of castings. I don't have any here now, and I would just sprinkle it across the top, mix it in. Don't overdo it. Get some of the worm castings in there. You have some fertilizer in there, some good stuff in there. Generally speaking, you got a sterile mix. I wouldn't take compost or anything from outside and add it to this, because you're going to be adding in whatever life is out there, and it could be bad stuff. But worm casting seems to be your safest bet in my experience. All right, let me put these together and we'll do a recap. Here are the 4 starting mixes. You can buy the bag products, just peat moss and vermiculite, Coco Coir, peat moss, vermiculite, and again I threw in some perlite. And then the 4th one you have just Coco Coir and vermiculite, again a little bit of perlite thrown in there. You don't need the perlite if you don't want to use it. This is basically what I use, the peat and vermiculite, and I'm using it in all the seed starts here. Please subscribe. I'll show you how to grow just about everything indoors. The basic vermiculite and peat moss mix works really well. You can pick whatever one you want. Don't add in organic granular fertilizer. If you want, throw in some worm castings after it's cooled off. This starting mix will be 75% cheaper than buying the bagged products. And again, look at the bagged products. I mean, this pretty much looks like, what I've made. It's dry. It's a little light in color because there's no moisture in there. But if we get to this one, let me bring it up. I mean, it looks really good. Again, this one. That's the Pro Mix. Not much difference. So you can definitely make this for a lot less money if you just buy the basic ingredients yourself. Thanks so much for watching. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com, and in a couple of days I'll have a blog article up on making seed starting mixes with all the recipes, and you can find that at therustedgardenblog.com. Thanks for watching.